This is Chuck Rozanski, and we are so blessed today because we have one of the icons of American literature here with us. We have Roy Thomas, who, oh my God, billions and billions of dollars in movies have been made on ideas and characters that he created over the many years that he's worked in the comics world. And he so kindly agreed to come out and visit with folks for Free Comic Book Day. Today's May 7th, and we're going to have Free Comic Book Day at Mile High Comics, and he's going to be here through this afternoon, and if you get a chance, come on by. But I wanted to ask Roy some questions because we did an interview with Jim Shooter recently, actually a series of them, and people were fascinated by the kind of inside information from the early part of comics. Now, you were involved with Jerry Bales, who was one of the founders of comic book fandom back in 1961 when he created Alter Ego, and
of course I started corresponding with him in late 60, actually.
Late 1960. Yeah, so before
2 or 3 months before he founded Alter Ego, that started all the other stuff.
Well, the thing to realize, and this is something that fans probably don't have the timeline, that's before Fantastic Four #1. That didn't come out till 61, fall of 61.
August. Yeah.
August,
so it's 6 months or so before, but of course it was mainly based on the DC fandom, a little bit of Archie Fly and Jaguar, but mostly the DC revival of the superheroes that Jerry and I were both enthusiastic about, culminating in Justice League, and before that, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman was about to come out, Atom, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was the whole revival period. Yeah. They were doing the Brave and Bold issues and things like that, and they were coming out. Yeah,
well, that was Jerry's main interest, not so much Marvel or Timely or whatever. Yeah.
I wanted to show everybody the pinup that you did. For Jerry. Actually, Ron Foss was the editor of this particular issue.
He did 2 issues in between Jerry and me.
But you actually, as an artist,
I didn't draw that. That's Bill Joe White. I'm in there.
Oh, there's Bill Joe. So let's figure out which.
I did the pinup of the Bestest League characters.
Okay, that's 12,
that's
13, 14.
In the photograph.
Oh, right there?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Lived and I were together for like 6 years. We broke up about this time, but she did a bunch of photographs that were used of that Joy Holiday.
Here we go. Here we go. Yes.
And I have the original of that art from Ron hanging up in my room.
Do you really? Yeah. You still have this original?
Yeah.
Trade, but this is the greatest writer from Marvel, having drawn before he. This is when. How old were you when you did this?
I didn't do it much before this. Is this 63? I was maybe 22, I guess. I was teaching in the St. Louis area.
Okay, so you were teaching, but this is when you were really young. And then you got to go to work for Mort Weisinger.
A couple of years later.
And so did Jim Shooter. And no one has great Mort Weisinger stories. Julie Schwartz, who was his best friend, says Mort Weisinger was a pain in the ass.
Yeah, that's the nicest thing I ever heard about. Dick Sprang seemed to like it.
Did he?
Yeah, but of course he lived in Colorado most of his life, and so he didn't
actually have.
But he's one of the few people I've ever heard that had a nice word about working with Weisinger. Almost the only one.
Yeah. Mort did not have a great reputation. He could be pretty.
And Shooter and I, of course, were sort of joined at the hip there, because during that week or so that I was there, working for Mort, that's when Jim apparently sent in his first bunch of scripts, and Weisinger started showing me, look what this young teenage boy, he's 13, 14 years old, whatever he said, sent me, and like he's going to be the next big writer. I mean, I was practically jealous. This is a kid half my age. Who's writing these stories, and Mort acts like he's going to be publishing tomorrow. And then I found out from Jim it was several more months before Mort actually bought the stories and used them. So he just sat on it, and, let Jim languish in Scranton for another half a year before he published these stories. So, but he acted to me like he's going to be publishing them tomorrow, and everything. It's almost like this is your competition.
That's when soon thereafter, you went over and you sent a letter to Stan, and then you went over to work for Stan.
Yeah. I didn't send a letter looking for work. I just wanted to meet him.
And
he had me take this writer's test. I never met him, and so forth, but I just picked it up. And I never met him until about 15 minutes before he hired me. So, which was on DC's lunch hour, on a Friday. The only week I was ever paid for, a 4-day week. And
Bort was really impressed.
Oh, he threw me out. I said, I'll work for you. I said, I'm taking a job to work for Stan because I said, I don't think you and I are, just compatible. Whatever. I said as politely as I could. But he said, and I said, but I won't leave you in the lurch. I told Stan, if it takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is I think you should hire back Nelson Bridwell, the guy I replaced. But the main thing is you should, I'll stick around for a couple weeks or more I won't leave you in the lurch because you brought me here to New York, even though I paid for it. They asked me something I paid for it, I paid it back. So they said, he just looked at me and glared and says, "You're a spy for Stan Lee. Get out." That was the last thing, the last words that Bort Weisiger ever spoke to me. I was gone from the office about 5 or 10 minutes later after picking up my couple of things down the hall. And I saw him again from a distance at somebody's funeral 6 months or so later. Never saw him again in my life. Never spoke to him again.
Yeah, you were probably just as well off from what I've heard.
I would have loved to, but it just was not to be.
No. Now, I'm going to ask you a question about something that you were privy to that is very arcane. And for you folks that are comic book fans out there, you've never even heard of this. Okay,
that's arcane.
Yeah, it is. It is very arcane. Because in 1967, 1968, you were there when Marvel got purchased, when Martin Goodman sold the company, and so you were there. You were an assistant for Stan at that time. Stan was Martin's second nephew.
He was related to two different people. He was related to him by marriage.
Okay.
And on two different people. His uncle Ron Solomon, and I think another woman, I forget who it was. Even though I wrote about it, it was kind of convoluted, but he was not blood relative at all, but he was related by marriage.
Okay. Well, so Stan is there, and I forget, I think it was Perfect Film and Chemical came in.
That's the name of the company before they changed it to Cadence, yes.
Right.
Perfect Film and Chemical. They were conglomerate, as we call it.
Yeah, and they came in and they bought Marvel. What happened at that point from your experiences, your lens of
the funny thing was, I knew that he portended something, but all that happened was that I don't know how much Stan knew about it in advance. No, he must have known something because Goodman had to get him to sign a contract. Perfect Film. They knew the comics were valuable enough, but they weren't going to pay Martin that $13 or $14 million, whatever it was he sold it for, if he didn't have Stan Lee under contract. Stan Lee didn't have a contract; he just worked, week to week for several decades.
Right.
And so the first I knew about it was probably Stan telling me, but I don't remember the moment, and so forth. I really don't. The only thing is, it obviously was going to change what Stan was hoping, I know, and he had the same hopes, years later when he became publisher in a different situation. Was he hoped that this would mean there'd be more money behind us. We weren't, and one of the nice things is we weren't any longer going to be distributed by DC Comics as distributor.
Right, and so they weren't going to keep your titles limited.
They had sort of relaxed that, but we had feelings. The first issue of Not Brand X that didn't sell well was the one with Superman character.
I remember that.
And so forth. That was the first one of those issues that didn't sell very well, so we were a little suspicious. But he just felt like they were kind of, keeping us down.
Well, they limited the number of titles.
They released that quite a bit though, because that 8 had long since gone by the wayside, long before I was there. But it was still kind of it was still not quite a dead hand on the throttle. It was
right. Being distributed by your rival is not a way to get ahead.
It's not the best way. They had a vested interest in distributing, and yet at the same time they had a vested interest in crippling us a little bit. So that was like one of Stan's main thing was the distribution deal from Curtis, which was part of the conglomerate more than anything else. He hoped they'd also have money to put in for advertising, which they didn't really do, or anything else. They didn't really put any money in. They just took more than they put in, so that the main thing became simply the new distribution deal, which was better for us, I guess.
For those of you who who don't know it, Curtis was a distribution company that was owned by the Saturday Evening Post, which was a major news magazine of the
For another
day.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Until they dismantled it.
Well, when they dismantled it, there was this miracle that occurred, which was one day Marvel was being distributed by DC, and the next day they were being distributed by Curtis, and I pulled the SEC documents as part of my college studies, and I discovered that no money changed hands. And I was always really curious. No money changed hands, and there was not.
You mean between Curtis, in between Perfect Film and
Curtis? Yeah, they just got it. And that was something that to this day is very, very suspicious, because the guys that ran Perfect Film and Chemical, they were entrepreneurs of the assertive kind.
that doesn't sound good.
I can't go into a lot of this, but I can just say that it was a miracle that Curtis appeared, and suddenly
But wasn't Curtis owned by Cadence? It wasn't.
Yes.
I thought, yeah. So that.
Yeah.
But it worked out well. That was the one.
It worked out well. Yeah. Now Chip Goodman was kept on when the company was
Martin
sold.
Goodman stayed around for another year or so, a couple of years, as the publisher, and he and Stan had just about the same relationship, except of course Stan was occasionally meeting with the people from Cadence, as it soon became after about a year or so.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know, of course, was that he was gradually sort of worming his way in because he didn't mind working for Martin Goodman. I mean, he and Goodman had a lot of problems, so forth, but he respected certain things about Goodman, his cover sense, his general business sense, which still was some, considering the 1957 Deborah thing was somewhat suspect. But he had some respect for him for things he didn't know about. But the one thing he didn't have respect for was working for his son. Now, and it's not because of Chip Goodman himself. It was almost anybody who'd been the son. He just felt like Chip Goodman was some kid that Stan had seen growing up, younger than himself. And suddenly, just because he's Martin Goodman's son, he's groomed to take over this company, and Stan is working under him. And I think it was after a few months of working under Chip that Stan decided, I'm either getting the hell out of here, or I'm going to be the publisher. He didn't want to work under Chip. I don't think he would have done that kind of power play if Martin had stayed longer.
Right. Now, Chip, later on, for those of you who collect comics and you like comics from the Silver Age, at the very end of the Silver Age, there was a company that sprang up for a very brief period of time called Atlas Seaboard, and that was a spite company where Martin Goodman formed Atlas Seaboard because Chip had gotten his ass fired from at Marvel, at least in part because Stan wanted him out, because it came down to Stan or Chip, and since Chip was fairly talentless, as he quickly proved at Seaboard, it was important that Cadence take a stand with Stan Lee. But see, now this is where...
But Stan didn't mind that Chip was still in charge of the magazines, which he was for a while. He just wanted them out of the comics. The thing that he told me when that happened in '74 was, the big thing there was, guess what? I'm going to be president and publisher, and Marvel is now going to be, and this was his words at the time he was telling me about it in '74, almost exactly 50 years ago, if not today, this month or thereabouts.
Yeah.
He said, we're going to be basically a separate company.
Yes.
And which we did.
No more magazine management.
Right. We had to have our own controller and and different things, and things changed a little bit, and so forth. And you're going to be the story editor, whatever that means.
Yeah, but that's when Stan became Stan, because really he had been through the 1960s. Obviously, he had been the titular head of what was going on, but he didn't have that much in the way of authority.
Right.
But through the whole machinations of Chip getting removed, the company being sold, Martin stepping back, whether he wanted to or not, Stan gradually became the power at Marvel. But this was not something that existed in the 1960s. It was something that Stan crafted.
It only came about in 1974. Preaching overnight. I mean, he worked at it for a little while.
Yeah.
I never knew any of that. Stan never confided with me about that. I think he even paid some visit to DC at some stage because he was so disgusted that if he hadn't been able to get something, he was going to switch companies. But he didn't tell me before or after the fact about any of that. I had to, he was not that kind of boss,
Well,
Didn't
see,
keep
to me,
in on
that's a
That's okay.
fascinating time in
Yeah.
history, because the whole period when Shelley Feinberg is brought in, eventually
Yeah,
Jim
see, I never got
is
to meet
brought
those
in.
people generally,
Yeah, that was probably just as well. The fact that they stayed over in Jersey.
It's probably well. I worried about him coming in because I was thinking, you get these people and they don't know anything about comics. At least Chip was raised around comics.
Yeah.
Kind of like them, but these people didn't know anything about it. And they all they care about is the bottom line. I understand, I respect that. I'm not one of these anti-publisher, only the artists and writers count kind of people. I'm not. I'm very much in favor. The capitalist system is working just fine, but sometimes it gets too heavy-handed and kills the goose that lays the golden egg. And I was worried that they would do something like that.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of things that were going on during that period of time, and watching Stan come out of this as well as he did, and the fact that he was able to keep Marvel alive, because there were a lot of periods. I mean, the DC implosion in what was it, 77 going into 78, where DC cut 40% of their line overnight. Stan had to explain to people like Shelley why the company was still viable and why they shouldn't shut it down. And it was about that time, I think, that they brought Galton in. And
no, Galton was in there by 75.
Was he?
Because when I was going to come, because the time when I arranged to come back to Marvel and then changed my mind was February of 1976. And Galton had been around for 6 months or more in 75, because Galton had to vet me to before I could be accepted to come back as editor-in-chief after a year and a half out of the job.
Yeah.
Galton and I had to go to lunch, and he had to kind of vet me and be convinced that I would be enough of a company man, because I had proved myself by their standards not to quite be. And I still wasn't mentally, but I was gonna play the game. I was gonna try harder to look like a
being on the editorial staff put you in a different position than a freelancer.
Right.
Yeah.
From the beginning, I always was, because I was on staff from day one at Marvel.
Yeah.
But I retained the viewpoint of a writer, and a person who liked comics in a different way than Stan did, who had never been a comics fan. I was really invested in the farm. Where Stan it was a job.
Yeah.
A job he did very well. He kind of enjoyed it, but he wasn't a comics fan, comic book fan growing up. They almost didn't have comic books when he was a kid.
Right. Whereas you were so immersed in the All-Star comics.
Yeah.
Did you go EC at all? I mean, were you an EC fan?
Not really. I would glance. See, I didn't like horror and crime comics much. I would glance at the things and remember their stories and stands, because I knew there was decent writing and artwork. But the only thing I bought, the first thing I ever bought on the stands that I know of from EC was Mad Number 5.
Okay.
I didn't even buy Mad Number 4 with Super Duper because I didn't quite understand it. I bought Mad Number 5 because I saw the Black Hawk parody.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, well, this is interesting. This is a character not as big as Superman. They do this parody. And I kind of finally got it at the age of 13 or so. And I went back and I actually found another store that still had Mad 4 on sale. So I bought that the same day or within a day. And then later they sold the other 3, which were a different kind of magazine, really, through the mail about a year or 2 later, and I picked it up. And then later I bought their, when they went toward their new trend, or new direction as opposed to new trend.
Right.
Piracy.
Oh, those were so
and
good.
Valor. And I especially loved Valor, and Impact had a strong feeling.
It was those were good
and I even bought MD and Psychoanalysis. And once I bought all that stuff. Of course, I was one of the few who did.
Now, were you in fandom at that point? Because there were people who were doing EC
I wasn't. No, I was not in any connection with any other fanzine outside earshot. I never knew anything about Archie Goodwin and the other people, and with their EC fanzines. The first time I heard the word fanzine was probably from Jerry Bales after talking to Julie Schwartz in February of 1961.
Yeah.
When he went to New York and decided to change what was going to be a JLA newsletter, that was the title, which was only going to deal with DC Comics, and just be a newsletter about what's coming out. And, he didn't give half for it. Talks to Julie. He hears about science fiction fanzines, which Julie had been a big part of back in the 30s.
Huge,
we took all the terminology. Fanzine, prequel comes from that. That's a big word now. Nobody heard the word prequel back then, or fanzine for that matter. And suddenly Jerry's there, and Julie gives him 3 copies. the first 3 issues of Zero, with an X, Dick Lupoff's supposed science fiction fanzine, which was really about all pop culture and had that comic section all in color for a dime.
Yep.
And this changed Jerry, this spun Jerry around, and he went to New York determined to do a newsletter. He came back, going to do a news magazine. He'd already come up with the name Alter Ego with a hyphen, and so forth. And when he came back and asked me to help him put together a first issue, which we did within a week or two, and by the end of March of '61, only about a month after he came back from New York, he was out in the mail, right about the same time that the Thompsons were putting out their comic art. So it was just the gestalt and the zeitgeist and all that stuff at the same time.
I'm gonna have Chris give us a pen. I'm gonna have you sign this.
It's going to be quite off the thing with this bouncy.
Oh, that's all right.
Of course, I didn't draw that. Now that's wrong.
I know. I just want you to sign it on the cover, and then I want you to sign your specific. Woohoo! Now,
I think I had that drawing too.
Actually, I think you're right. I think this is because we're going through the construction zone.
Wait till we I can do it in a couple of seconds.
Yeah, we're about 5 minutes away from the store.
When you stop.
For that drawing, that Eclipse drawing, and that drawing of the Fantastic Four takeoff, leading into their parody in the next issue of the Justice League Ready for, I had one of Ron's Eclipse story, the second one that he did for me, the original art, and that was like a 9-page story or whatever it was, and I traded all that art because I knew he needed money and he could sell it probably. I said I'd give it to him for those 2 drawings.
Oh my God, that was a very generous trade.
I did it, because I knew Ron needed the money and everything, and he'd have it. If he kept it, that's okay. If he didn't keep it, he got a few $100s out of it, more than he would have got for this drawing and that.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people from the beginning days, they didn't prosper.
No.
Ron
had something in him. He just couldn't. He had all that talent, but he couldn't quite. There were people, him and Larry Ivy, they just never quite got it together, and yet they were so close. Especially Ivy, had so much talent that they should have become professionals. Larry sort of did in a slight way, but he should have been bigger. But he was always too busy to become a success. Well, I was too busy to accept Stanley's offer of a job. I was too busy to do this. And the next thing you know, you're not busy anymore because you passed up all your chances, and that's what happened to Larry.
Well, I personally collect fanzines like this. I have an Alter Ego #1.
Yeah, me too.
I I actually went to Jerry's house when I went to the '72 Detroit Triple Fanfare. 73.
Where was he living then? He wasn't in Inkster anymore. He moved from Inkster.
Yeah, he had
the second or third burglary was what finally got him.
Well, he had this beautiful house on this tree-lined street in downtown Detroit. But the bedroom that I stayed in was, he had comics everywhere, but a lot of them were coverless because what he was doing was he was taking clippings from them and using those to create fanzines.
And the Who's Who at that time.
Yeah, he was working on that. Yep, I was subscribed to that. But Jerry and Gene were really nice. I hitchhiked all the way out there because I had no money, and
that was a common complaint of all of us.
By the time I got to their house, I was aromatic. And they took me. I had slept under a bridge in the rain in Gary, Indiana, the night before, and I was soaking wet. And they took me in, and Gene washed my clothes for me, and then Jerry actually drove me to the show. So he didn't go to the show. He had to work. He was teaching, and he didn't go to the show, but he drove me back and forth because he was such a nice man.
That's fairly late in his career. By that time, he wasn't that interested in the everyday stuff, except for his Who's Who.
Right.
But that was an enormous undertaking.
Right, and that was the main thing he was working on. He did go.
I have Xeroxes at least this high of all of his questionnaires come back.
Really?
Gene, his second wife, gave me that to copy before she donated or whatever. I was able to copy them all. So I've got pretty much a complete copy of all the questionnaires, which is signed by hundreds of artists, who were all alive back in the 60s and 70s when he was gathering that information.
Oh, he was, people don't give him enough credit, and that's...
You can't give him enough credit.
When I was thinking about what we could do with this interview, I was thinking, we could cover the ground of, tell me about working on the Avengers or this or that, but that's ground that's been
Wolverine
covered.
And Stan Lee and all that stuff.
You've
heard all that
so
stuff,
many wonderful things that you've worked on, but they're the same questions. To me, the things that you did when you were very young, and that were seminal to the beginning of our entire fandom. Okay, comics survived because we had fandom, because we had dedicated collectors and buyers in the 1970s. So when the newsstand and the general public turned their back on us, it was because of the work that you did then that comics survived. And I think
just
that,
an accident.
Oh,
anything that I did that had any lasting impact was probably by accident, because I was just looking for a job that I really liked, that that I stumbled into, that got me out of teaching high school, which
But you changed the world.
Well, I think Stan and Julie Schwartz and people like that are a little more. But,
I don't agree in this.
Listen, I'm not totally modest. I'll put myself in there. I'll put myself there as a second or third rate. But guys like Stan, they're on a different plane.
As a creator, you were first rate. But as a fan,
I was first rate.
Working,
except that even then, I was only second banana to Jerry. I'd have never done alter ego or anything like that on my own. I wasn't inventive enough.
Yes,
I was always a second banana.
But we've
first
all
to Jerry,
stood on the shoulders of giants, and we've all.
And then I took it over and I did okay with it. But I mean, it wasn't something I would have got into on my own. Because that took a lot of dedication and even a little money. Jerry had at least his salary a little larger, wasn't that huge, care of the printing and stuff, and then trying to get money. I didn't even have that, although eventually by '64 I did publish Alter Ego and managed to sell it and make a few bucks. But it was never about money.
But some of us have had the ability to move the needle and change the world, even though we were operating in self-interest perhaps at that moment in time, and we had no grand vision or no grand ideas.
That's me.
But look at what you accomplished nonetheless. And I think that, all of your other accolades aside, I think when I thought about what we should talk about today, it was definitely about how you helped get it all started.
Well,
and I want to shake your
hand. I think people should know about that fan thing, because it was important, not just me, but Jerry and everybody. Well, thank you.
And I want to thank you.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for getting together with my manager, John Savino, here to bring me out to Denver.
Hold on. I got to give this guy a hug.
Oh, John, I'm so glad.
I want you to know what he said.
Never been in demand.
What he said is what you should say. Don't listen to him. He's too humble. This guy says it. He says it the way it is. Beautiful. I love you, Chuck. I love you.
All right, we're at Mile High Comics. We have comic fans everywhere.
We've been around this place for years.
Well, you're going to enjoy it. It's fun, and we've got Dennis and Judy Shepard here from the Matthew Shepard Foundation.
What is that?
The Matthew Shepard Foundation. Matthew Shepard was the young gay boy that was beaten to death up in Wyoming 22 years ago, and his parents formed a foundation to try and pass legislation that protects the rights of people that are in the LGBTQ community, but also people who are being discriminated against on the basis of religion or race or ethnic origin. And they have this wonderful foundation that creates enormous public good. Well, the whole event today is a benefit for them, for the Matthew Shepard Foundation. So I want you to meet them.
And Chuck, I just want to say something on camera so you do. Roy is very philanthropic, but I respect and I love what you do for your community. I'm getting teary-eyed because we see this from a fan side and a business side. These heroes on these comic books made us greater, and we gave us the ability to dream. You created your dreams, and you're a superhero too. I just want you to know.
Thank you.
I love you, man.
All right, guys, we gotta go. We gotta go get some autographs signed. Yeah. Do you still have the pen?
Yeah, I'll just sign the cover.
Definitely want a picture of that.
Well, I want you to sign the cover and just put "To Chuck" on there for me.
We'll
okay, and then I want you to sign the interior.
Sure. Should I date it, or you don't care?
I don't care.
All right.
But
in the pictures here somewhere. Stupid little picture.
Yes, I am a fanboy. That's not.
I don't have this picture. I don't know what happened to that.
Oh, we got to show everyone your picture from this time period.
Yeah, that's me.
Yes.
That's me at about 21.
This is called the epitome of feckless youth, right here.
That kid right there would change the world. That kid right there would change.
I think they use that in Revenge of the Nerds.
All right, here we go.